This is HMS K5, one of the Royal Navy's most unusual submarines. She was part of the K-class, a long, sleek type of boat built during the First World War and designed to do something no other submarine of the time could manage: keep up with the big battleships of the fleet. By early 1921, the war was over, but K5 was still in service. She was a modern, powerful submarine carrying more than 50 officers and men, and she was about to sail on what should have been a routine training exercise. No one on board could know that this short peacetime trip would turn K5 into one of the Royal Navy's great mysteries. To understand what happened to K5, we have to look at the strange family she belonged to. Most submarines of the era were small, relatively slow boats built to creep up on enemy ships. The K-class were the opposite. They were huge, over 100 meters long, and intended to race alongside the fleet on the surface. To get that speed, the designers fitted them with steam boilers and turbines like a small destroyer. That meant funnels, air intakes, and extra openings in the hull, all of which had to be shut and sealed before a dive. On paper, it was an ambitious idea. In practice, it made the K-class complicated, unforgiving boats where any mistake could quickly become dangerous. Behind the steel hull of K5 were ordinary men, stokers feeding the boilers, electricians tending the batteries, signalmen, petty officers and young lieutenants drawn from ports and towns all over Britain and the Empire. Some of them had seen hard service in the First World War. Others were new to sea, proud simply to be wearing the Royal Navy badge on their caps. Life in a submarine was cramped, hot and tiring, but it created incredibly close bonds. Every man depended on the others for his safety. When K5 prepared to sail in January 1921, the crew joked, smoked, shook hands, and settled into their routines. For them, it was another exercise, another trip out and back. They had no reason to think it would be their last. In Torbay, on England's south coast, K5 lay at anchor with other submarines, cruisers and destroyers of the Atlantic Fleet. The plan was a large-scale exercise in the Bay of Biscay, off the coasts of France and Spain, to practice how surface ships and submarines would fight together. On the morning of departure, anchors were raised and warships formed up in line ahead. To anyone watching from the shore, it looked almost routine, a grey column of ships sliding out towards the open sea. Somewhere among them was K5, her long hull cutting through the waves as she took her place in the formation and headed for the Atlantic. Deep inside the submarine, away from the spray and the cold wind, lay the control room, the brain of K5. Here, officers and senior ratings watched the gauges, steered the boat, and controlled her depth. Wheels and levers worked the diving planes. Telegraphs sent orders back to the engine and boiler rooms, and speaking tubes carried messages to the compartments forward and aft. In normal conditions, it was a place of method and routine. Course changes, log entries, regular drills. On this exercise, everything seemed to be running as expected. The crew had dived, surfaced, and followed signals many times before. There was no hint of what was coming. By the time the fleet reached the Bay of Biscay, the weather was typical for January: a rolling swell, low grey cloud, and a chill wind across the decks. This stretch of water had a reputation deep, rough and unpredictable, but for the Royal Navy it was a standard training ground. The exercise called for the submarines to maneuver beneath the fleet, changing depth and position on precise signals. K5 and her sister boats were to act as attacking forces, showing how they could threaten enemy battleships. It was all carefully written out on paper, with timings and safety rules. Out here on the open ocean, though, even a small error in timing or depth could have serious consequences. As the exercise unfolded, a fresh set of signals reached K5 from the flagship. The submarines were ordered to dive to attack depth and reposition. On K5's bridge, the order was relayed below. Men moved quickly to their stations. Funnels and air intakes were shut, hatches checked, and the boat prepared to leave the surface. For the crew, this was familiar. Drilled many times. Close up, clear lower decks, stand by to dive. From the outside, observers saw the long hull settling lower in the water as ballast tanks began to flood. Somewhere in the Atlantic swell, K5 sent her final message that she was diving, and then she slipped beneath the waves. On deck, the last actions were brisk and practiced. Sailors swung heavy steel hatches shut and dogged them down, turning the wheels until metal met metal with a solid thud. Inside the boat, men listened for those sounds, ticking them off in their minds. In a K-class, there were more openings than on a typical submarine, a result of that complex steam machinery. Everything had to be perfectly sealed before the boat went down. Any mistake here could let in water where it was least expected to the men doing the job, though it was just another dive. They had closed these hatches in harbor, in exercises and on patrol. No one imagined it would be the last time they ever did it on K5. With the submarine buttoned up, the control room gave the order to dive. Valves opened, ballast tanks filled, and K5 began to grow heavier in the water. Men felt the change in movement as the bow dipped and the sea pressed more firmly around the hull. Light at the periscope head faded. The outside world turned from the grey of the surface to the blue-green of depth to the officers. The important numbers were on the gauges: depth, trim, speed. To the crew, it was the creak of the hull and the hiss of air that told them things were happening as expected. From above, the Atlantic looked unchanged. K5 had simply disappeared, doing exactly what a submarine is meant to do. What happened next we can only reconstruct from evidence and experience. Somewhere during that dive, something went wrong. K5 appears to have gone far deeper than planned, and to have done so very quickly. Perhaps she lost control of her trim. Perhaps a sudden angle or burst of speed drove her bow down. In a long, heavy boat like a class, once a steep dive started, it could be extremely difficult to stop. As the depth increased, the pressure on the hull rose sharply. Steel plates groaned, pipes strained, gauges would have swept past their safe marks. There was no distress signal, no order to surface, no time to react. Most experts believe that, at a great depth, the pressure of the water finally crushed K5's hull, killing all 57 men on board almost instantly. On the surface, the first reaction to K5's failure to reappear was confusion. Submarines could be late, a slow drill, a minor fault, a simple misunderstanding of orders, but as minutes stretched into an hour, concern turned to alarm. Other ships in the exercise began to search the area where K5 had dived. Destroyers swept back and forth, their lookouts watching for any sign of a periscope or returning hull. Signals flashed across the fleet, trying to confirm K5's last known movements. There was no reply, no flare, no wireless message, nothing breaking through the surface. As daylight faded and searchlights played across the tops of the waves, the officers in command had to face an awful possibility. K5 was not just late, she was missing. Eventually, the searchers found evidence, but not the kind they had hoped for. On the rolling surface of the Bay of Biscay, they came across a spreading sheen of oil, rainbow colors rippling on the dark water. Among it floated scattered pieces of wreckage, broken timbers, a bent metal casing, a small wooden ditty box that might have held a sailor's few personal belongings. There were no survivors, no lifeboats or rafts, no bodies that could be recovered. Just fragments, mute and drifting, that pointed to a violent end somewhere far below. For the officers on the scene, the conclusion was unavoidable. K5 had been destroyed in deep water, and every one of her 57 officers and men was lost. Back in Britain, the Admiralty convened an inquiry to find out what had gone wrong in a wood-panelled room. Senior naval officers and engineers studied charts, models, and plans of the K5. Witnesses from the exercise described the signals they had seen, the last position of K5, and the moment they realized she was missing, pieces of wreckage were examined and compared with the drawings. Could there have been an explosion, a collision, a failure of the hull or diving gear? In the end, the inquiry could not give a perfect, detailed answer. The most likely explanation, they concluded, was that K5 had gone out of control on her dive and plunged far beyond her safe depth, until the immense pressure of the sea crushed her. No one individual was blamed. It was recorded as a tragic accident. For the families, the official report brought little comfort. Dozens of homes received the same stark message. A son, husband, father, or brother was missing, believed drowned in a training accident far from land. In ports and naval towns, memorial services were held. The names of K5's men were added to rolls of honor and carved into stone alongside those lost in wartime. There was no grave to visit, only the sea itself. Families looked out across the water, knowing that somewhere, far beyond sight or reach, their loved ones lay on the ocean floor. For the Royal Navy, K5 became another reminder that even in peacetime, service in submarines carried deadly risks. Today, HMS K5 rests somewhere on the floor of the Bay of Biscay, at a depth too great for divers and beyond the reach of ordinary exploration. No clear images of her wreck have been brought back. In that sense, she remains partly hidden, her final moments known only in outline. What we do know is that 57 officers and men went to sea in an powerful submarine and never returned. Their loss helped shape later submarine design and training. As the Navy learned bitter lessons about depth, control, and safety, K5 is remembered now not just as a failed machine, but as a symbol of the risks faced by those who serve beneath the waves. Somewhere in the darkness and silence of the deep, her hull still lies as a hidden memorial to her crew, and to a chapter of naval history that should never be forgotten.